My daughter-in-law looked straight at my son and hissed, "Your mom is stealing our money." In that instant, my whole world collapsed. I watched the confusion flash across my son's face before it twisted into rage. He turned to me, his voice shaking the walls of our living room. "Mom, how could you do this to us?" I stood there frozen, my hands trembling against the edge of the kitchen counter. For decades, I had poured every ounce of my life into raising him, working late nights, clipping coupons, saving every spare penny so he could have opportunities I never had. And now, with just one poisonous sentence, the woman he chose to marry had erased all of it. The way she clutched his arm, leaning into his side like the perfect, loyal wife, made my stomach turn. Her eyes flicked to me with a tiny smirk, a glimmer of triumph that my son completely missed. He only saw me as the villain in her carefully painted story. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but the words caught in my throat. No matter what I said, he would not believe me now. He had already chosen her side. My chest ached, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out my thoughts. That night, I sat alone in my room, replaying his words over and over, each one cutting deeper than the last. A storm was brewing, and I knew this was only the beginning. If your own child yelled at you because of someone else's lies, what would you do? Comment below. I want to see how many of you would react differently than I did. When my son slammed the door that night, leaving me alone in the echo of his anger, I found myself drifting back through the years. It is strange how memory works. In moments of deepest pain, our minds search for the times when love was unquestionable, when life still felt steady and safe. I remembered the long winters when he was just a boy, sitting at the kitchen table with his homework while I stitched clothes to sell at the market. His small hand would reach for mine every now and then, asking me to check his math or listen to a story he had written. I used to think those nights were exhausting. Now I would give anything to return to them, to hear his little voice and see that unshakable trust in his eyes. His father, Robert, worked hard but was often away. That left me to manage the house, the bills, and every scraped knee or broken heart. I was proud of what I built, even if it was not grand. We did not live in luxury, but our home was filled with warmth, laughter, and the smell of homemade meals. When he graduated college, I cried tears of joy. All those sleepless nights had been worth it. He was the first in our family to earn a degree, and I had scraped together every cent to help him avoid crushing debt. My savings account was thin, my back often sore, but my heart swelled with pride. Then came Emily. She entered our lives like a summer storm. At first, she seemed dazzling. Her smile was radiant, her charm effortless. I will admit, I wanted to believe she was the right one. My son deserved happiness. She made him laugh, and he looked at her as if she had hung the stars in the sky. I tried to welcome her with open arms. I cooked her favorite dishes, asked about her family, even offered her jewelry that had been in mine for decades. But slowly, little cracks began to show. She rarely spoke to me directly. She whispered to him when I left the room. I would walk into the kitchen and find her glancing quickly at the mail, slipping it back onto the counter before I could say a word. She seemed endlessly curious about my finances, about Robert's life insurance after he passed, about the modest house I still owned outright. At first, I brushed it aside. Perhaps she was just nosy. Perhaps I was too sensitive, too protective of the small nest egg I had built. But there was something in the way she looked at me, like I was an obstacle to be removed rather than family to be cherished. The real change came after Robert's funeral. Grief had hollowed me out, yet even in that darkness, I noticed her tone had shifted. She no longer tried to hide her disdain. She made little comments about how things should be modernized, how young couples need their own space, how older people should think about downsizing. My son nodded along, too wrapped in her beauty to recognize the insult beneath her words. It was subtle at first. She would sigh loudly when I asked a question. She rolled her eyes when I reminded my son of family traditions. She suggested they host holidays at their place, conveniently forgetting that for decades, our home had been the center of every celebration. Then the suggestions became demands. She told him they needed access to all financial accounts to plan for the future. She pressed him to ask me about the title of the house. She even hinted that maybe I should sign things over to them to make estate planning easier. My son repeated her words like a loyal parrot, not realizing how deeply they cut. I tried to reason with him. I reminded him that I had worked my entire life for what little I had, that this home was where he took his first steps, where Robert and I built every memory together. But it was like speaking into a void. Her voice had become his truth, and my words were little more than static. The night she accused me of stealing, I realized her plan had finally succeeded. She had planted enough seeds of doubt that my son could look at me, the woman who had given him everything, and see a thief. My knees buckled under the weight of it. In the days that followed, I kept to myself. I cooked meals that went untouched. I folded laundry in silence. I listened to them whisper behind closed doors, their voices rising in anger and suspicion. The walls of my own home no longer felt safe. I noticed small changes in my son. He stopped asking about my day. He no longer hugged me goodnight. The warmth between us had cooled to suspicion, his eyes scanning me as if searching for proof of her lies. It was in those quiet moments that I began to question myself. Had I been foolish with money? Had I left something unsecured? But the truth always surfaced when I remembered the stacks of bank statements I kept neatly filed away. I had never hidden anything, never taken a penny that did not belong to me. And yet, here I was, standing trial in my own family, judged by the very person I loved most. Do you think my son truly believed her words? Or was he simply blinded by love and loyalty to his wife? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts, because even now, I still struggle to understand which one hurts more. The days after her accusation felt like a nightmare that never ended. Every morning, I would hear their hushed conversations drifting down the hallway, her voice sharp and insistent, his quieter but filled with tension. Sometimes I caught fragments that pierced me like knives. She must be hiding something. Why else would she be so defensive? We cannot let her ruin our future. My son never used to speak that way. His words had always been gentle, his tone full of respect. Now, every sentence carried suspicion, as though I were a stranger who had wandered into his home. And Emily knew exactly how to fuel that fire. She became more daring. I would find her in my study, pretending to dust shelves while her eyes scanned the paperwork on my desk. Once, I walked in to see her slipping an envelope back into the filing cabinet. She smiled sweetly and said she was only trying to help me organize. My instincts screamed otherwise. Meals became battlegrounds. She would bring up concerns about money in casual tones, as if she were simply worried for my well-being. "Maybe Mom is overwhelmed," she would say, her eyes wide with false innocence. Maybe she just lost track of all the withdrawals. My son would glance at me then, his jaw tight, his fork scraping the plate in silence. I tried to remind myself that lies eventually unravel, but the waiting was unbearable. The home I had loved for decades had become a stage where every gesture was scrutinized, every word twisted. I kept my bank statements locked in a drawer, a small lifeline to the truth. Yet even holding them in my hands gave me no comfort, because I knew they would not look at them unless forced. The breaking point came one Saturday morning. My son stormed into the kitchen, waving a slip of paper Emily had shown him. "Explain this, Mom," he demanded. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice trembling with anger. It was a transaction receipt, one I had never seen before, showing a large withdrawal from what appeared to be my account. I stared at it, baffled. The account number was almost mine, but not quite. A single digit was off. Emily stood behind him, her hand on his shoulder, her lips pressed together in a perfect imitation of concern. "I did not want to believe it," she whispered, "but I found this in the trash." Adi 7. In that moment, I understood her game. She had manufactured evidence, piecing together just enough truth to make the lie believable. I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. "That is not my account. Look at the number carefully." But my son only grew angrier. "Do you think I am stupid, Mom? Do you think I cannot read?" His words sliced through me. I wanted to scream, to shake him until he saw sense, but all I could do was clutch the counter to keep from collapsing. Later that day, when they left the house, I sat at my desk and pulled out every statement I had saved. Page after page confirmed what I already knew. Every cent was accounted for, every withdrawal explained. The so-called receipt was a forgery, but how could I prove it when my own son refused to look? That night, I prayed for strength. I begged Robert, wherever he was, to guide me. I needed a way to expose the truth before her lies destroyed what little relationship I had left with my son. The answer came in the form of a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Jenkins, our neighbor from across the street. She was an older woman, sharp as ever despite her years, and she had known our family for decades. She looked troubled as she stepped inside. "I hate to intrude," she said softly, "but I think you should know what I saw." She explained that earlier that week, she had watched Emily meet a man in a parked car at the corner of the street. Money had exchanged hands, and papers too. "It did not feel right," Mrs. Jenkins admitted. "I thought maybe it was just me, but when I heard the shouting, I realized something bigger was going on." My heart pounded. Could this be the key? Could someone finally testify to Emily's schemes? I thanked her, my hands trembling as I poured tea neither of us touched. It was the first flicker of hope I had felt in weeks. Still, I knew words alone would not be enough. Emily was clever. She had wrapped my son around her finger so tightly that he would dismiss the neighbor's account as gossip. I needed cold, undeniable proof. And that proof was hiding somewhere in the very bank records Emily had tried to twist against me. The next morning, I went to the bank myself. Sitting across from the manager, I laid out my situation. He listened carefully, his brows knitting as I explained the forged receipt. Then he pulled up the account records on his computer. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, turning the screen toward me, "this is your account. There are no large unexplained withdrawals. But look here." He clicked, and another account appeared, one I had never seen before, opened recently under my son's name, but with Emily listed as a joint holder. The blood drained from my face. This was it. This was where the missing money was going. She had created a shadow account, funneling funds while pointing the blame at me. I walked out of that bank with copies of every statement, my hands shaking as I clutched them to my chest. They were more than paper. They were weapons. They were my defense. At home, I tucked them away, waiting for the right moment to strike. I knew confronting them now would only escalate things, but soon, very soon, their lies would choke them. At this point, who do you think will expose the truth first? Will it be me standing tall with the evidence in my hands, or will the evidence itself rise up and leave them no place to hide? Share your guess in the comments. I held those bank statements like a lifeline, yet I knew the danger of revealing them too soon. Emily had spent months weaving her web, and if I confronted her without care, she would twist even the truth into another accusation. So I waited, watching closely, gathering every fragment of evidence I could. It did not take long for her to slip again. One evening, as I walked past the den, I heard her on the phone. Her voice was sharp, stripped of the sweetness she showed in front of my son. "Yes, the transfers went through. He will not question it. She is too old to notice anything. By the time she figures it out, it will all be ours." I froze outside the door, my breath caught in my chest. She was so confident, so certain of her victory. But the moment she sensed movement, she lowered her tone, ending the call quickly. When she emerged, she plastered on her sugary smile. "Oh, I was just talking to a friend," she said lightly. My son, who had joined me in the hallway, believed her without hesitation. That night I could not sleep. I sat at my desk with the statements spread before me, each line a quiet witness to her deceit. Yet even with the evidence in hand, I feared my son would refuse to see it. He was so deeply entangled in her lies that I wondered if the truth would even matter anymore. Days passed, each heavier than the last. Emily became bolder, pressing my son to demand control of my accounts. She insisted that I was unfit to manage money, that I might gamble it away or give it to strangers. He repeated her claims to me, his voice firm, though his eyes flickered with doubt he would not admit. Then fate delivered another piece of the puzzle. Mrs. Jenkins returned, this time with photographs. She had taken them discreetly from her window. Emily meeting the same man again, exchanging documents and envelopes thick with cash. The images were grainy but unmistakable. My son's wife, caught in the act of betrayal. I thanked Mrs. Jenkins with tears in my eyes. "You may have saved me," I whispered, clutching the photos to my chest. The next weekend, Emily orchestrated her boldest move yet. She convinced my son to call a family discussion at the dining table. I recognized it for what it was, a trial. They sat across from me, side by side, united in their false accusations. Emily spoke with rehearsed sorrow, painting herself as the dutiful wife forced to uncover her mother-in-law's dishonesty. My son nodded along, his eyes fixed on me with the coldness of a stranger. You need to admit what you have done, he demanded. It will be easier if you confess now. We can help you. And I stared at them, my heart pounding. Every instinct screamed to lay the papers on the table, to shatter their illusion right then and there. But I held back. Not yet. They were too sure of themselves, too wrapped in their performance. I wanted the exposure to be undeniable, irreversible. So I said nothing. I let them speak, let Emily spin her elaborate tale of missing money and suspicious receipts. The more she talked, the deeper she buried herself. My silence unnerved her, though she hid it behind practiced expressions. After the so-called meeting, I returned to my room, my resolve hardening. The time was coming to end this charade. But I needed the perfect moment, one where the evidence would strike like lightning and leave no room for denial. The moment arrived sooner than expected. A letter arrived from my late husband's lawyer, requesting a meeting about his estate. I had nearly forgotten about Robert's will, drafted years ago when our lives were simpler. Emily, however, had not forgotten. I saw the flicker of greed in her eyes when she heard the news. She immediately began pressing my son, filling his head with promises of wealth. "This is it," she whispered to him when she thought I could not hear. "Once the inheritance is sorted, we will finally have what we deserve. She cannot hold on to it forever." Her confidence only grew as the day of the meeting approached. She paraded around the house as though the fortune were already hers. My son followed her lead, treating me like an obstacle standing in the way of his new life. I stayed silent, but inside, a fire burned. They thought the will would hand them everything, but they had no idea what Robert had done to protect me. He had always been cautious, always thinking ahead. If Emily had her eyes set on his fortune, she was about to discover just how wrong she was. The night before the meeting, I laid everything out on my desk: the bank statements, the photographs from Mrs. Jenkins, and the forged receipt Emily had tried to use against me. Piece by piece, I arranged them like a puzzle, a story waiting to be told. Tomorrow, in front of the lawyer, in front of my son, Emily would finally face the truth she could no longer twist. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. The storm she had unleashed was about to turn back on her, and I would no longer be the one on trial. The morning of the lawyers' meeting arrived with a heavy sky, as if the world itself sensed the reckoning ahead. I dressed carefully, smoothing the wrinkles from my blouse, pressing my hair into neat order. On my desk lay the folder filled with evidence: bank statements, photographs, and the forged receipt. They were my shield and my sword, though I prayed I would not need them. When my son and Emily came down the stairs, their energy was electric with expectation. Emily's eyes sparkled with triumph. Her hand clamped around my son's arm like a queen leading her knight. He carried himself with cold detachment, offering me no greeting, no warmth. To him, I was no longer a mother, but an obstacle soon to be erased. We rode in silence to the law office. The air inside the car was so thick with unspoken words I could hardly breathe. Emily whispered occasionally, her lips brushing my son's ear, filling him with visions of wealth and freedom. I turned my gaze to the window, silently calling on Robert to give me strength. The lawyer, Mr. Harris, greeted us in the conference room. He was a tall man with silver hair, his expression calm but serious. "Thank you for coming," he began, gesturing for us to sit. "As you know, today we will review the terms of Robert Sullivan's will." Emily leaned forward eagerly, her manicured nails tapping the table. "We are ready," she said sweetly, though her eyes betrayed her hunger. My son nodded, his hand covering hers, both of them united in anticipation. Mr. Harris opened the folder before him. Robert prepared this document years ago, with several amendments over time. His goal was to ensure that his family would be secure. He cleared his throat and began to read. The early passages were formal, outlining small bequests to distant relatives and charitable organizations. Emily shifted impatiently, her foot bouncing under the table. She was waiting for the fortune she believed was hers. Then came the pivotal moment. "To my beloved wife, Margaret Sullivan, I leave full ownership of our family home, all joint bank accounts, and the bulk of my estate, totaling approximately $3.6 million. The room went still. My son blinked rapidly, as if the words had not yet registered. Emily's smile faltered, her lips parting slightly in disbelief. Mr. Harris continued, his voice steady. "To my son, David Sullivan, I leave a trust fund of $50,000 to be released in annual increments of $5,000. This condition was chosen deliberately to encourage responsibility and prevent undue influence. Should David contest this will or act in a manner deemed harmful to Margaret, the trust is to be forfeited entirely. Emily gasped, the sound sharp and strangled. That cannot be right, she burst out. There must be a mistake. Robert would never limit his only son like that. Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses. This is the final version of the will, signed and notarized. Robert was very clear about his intentions. My son turned pale, his jaw tightening. He looked at Emily, then at me, his expression a storm of confusion and rage. You knew about this, he accused, his voice shaking. You manipulated him, didn't you? You made him write it this way. I felt my heart ache, but I met his gaze with calm. No, David. Your father was not blind. He saw things long before I did. He wanted to protect me because he feared this very moment. Emily slammed her hand on the table. Lies. You cannot sit there and pretend you are innocent when the evidence shows you have been stealing. I have proof. She pulled the forged receipt from her purse and shoved it toward Mr. Harris. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with resolve. I opened my folder and slid the real bank statements across the table. Look closely, I said quietly. This is my account. Every transaction accounted for. And this, I held up the forged receipt, is not mine. One digit is wrong, and the bank has confirmed it. The account this came from was opened in my son's name, with Emily as a joint holder. Mr. Harris examined the papers, his brows knitting. These statements are legitimate, he confirmed. And if what you say about the secondary account is true, then there is serious misconduct here. Before Emily could speak, I revealed the photographs. Grainy but clear enough, they showed her exchanging envelopes with a man at the corner of our street. Our neighbor took these, I explained. She witnessed the exchanges herself. Money and documents changed hands. Emily, you were not protecting this family. You were siphoning funds while blaming me. Emily's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her hands fumbled with the edge of the table, desperate for an escape that no longer existed. My son stared at the evidence, his world crumbling. For weeks, he had chosen her lies over my truth, and now the betrayal was undeniable. His lips quivered as he looked between us, torn between fury and disbelief. Emily, he whispered, tell me this is not real. But Emily could not answer. Her silence was louder than any confession. Mr. Harris cleared his throat. This changes matters. David, understand that if you or your wife attempt to contest this, under false pretenses, the trust will be revoked entirely. I will ensure the court has all the necessary documents. The weight of Robert's foresight settled over me then. He had seen the danger long before it reached my doorstep. He had built walls of protection so that even in death, his love shielded me from betrayal. Emily's mask finally cracked. She pushed back her chair, her voice trembling with rage. This is not over. I will not let you ruin everything. She stormed out of the room, her heels clattering down the hallway. My son remained seated, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the table. He looked broken, a man who had gambled everything and lost. He muttered, almost to himself, "How did I not see it? How could I let this happen?" I did not answer. The silence between us was heavy, filled with years of love and the sharp edge of betrayal. As we left the office, I felt a strange calm. The truth had spoken louder than all of Emily's lies. My name had been cleared, my future secured. Yet the cost was staggering. The bond between mother and son had been shattered, perhaps beyond repair. Have you ever seen someone so confident in their lies until one piece of paper destroyed everything? Tell me if you have witnessed a downfall like this. Share your stories in the comments. That night, I sat by the window, the folder still in my lap. The battle was not entirely over, but the tide had turned. Emily's empire of deceit had crumbled in a single day, and my son had been left to face the wreckage. I knew there would be more confrontations, more tears, but the hardest part was done. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. The ride home from the lawyer's office was silent, a suffocating silence that pressed against my chest. Emily sat stiffly in the back seat, her eyes blazing with fury. My son drove with both hands clenched around the wheel, his jaw locked so tightly I thought it might shatter. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, the folder of evidence still clutched in my lap. When we reached the house, Emily was the first to break. She slammed the door and stormed inside, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. "You ruined everything," she spat at me, her voice dripping with venom. "Do you think you have won? Do you think this will last?" I did not answer. Her words no longer carried weight. The truth had spoken, and no amount of rage could undo it. My son lingered in the doorway, his shoulders slumped, his eyes dull. For years he had walked with confidence, certain that Emily was his partner, his truth. Now he looked like a man stripped bare, uncertain of who he was or where to go. Emily turned on him then, her mask of sweetness finally shattered. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You promised me everything. You said your mother would not stand in the way. You told me we would have the house, the money, the life we deserved. And now look at us. Do you see what you have done?" He flinched as though struck. "I trusted you," he whispered, his voice raw. "I believed every word. I turned against my own mother because of you. And now I have nothing." Their shouting filled the house, echoing off the walls that had once been filled with laughter. I retreated to the kitchen, pouring myself a cup of tea I never touched, listening as their argument raged. Emily accused him of weakness. He accused her of lies. Their love, once paraded so boldly before me, crumbled like sand slipping through their fingers. I should have felt pity, but all I felt was a weary relief. At last, their alliance had turned inward, destroying itself. Later that night, I heard the crash of a glass shattering against the wall. Emily's voice rose in a shriek. "I will not stay here like a beggar. I will not be humiliated by your mother." My son's reply was hoarse, desperate. "Then go, Emily. If you cannot face what you have done, then leave." For a moment I thought she might, but she did not. She stayed, simmering with rage, plotting her next move. I knew her too well to think she would surrender easily. In the days that followed, the house became a battlefield. Emily locked herself in their bedroom for hours, emerging only to fling accusations. My son avoided me, his shame too heavy to face. I found him sitting alone in the garage one evening, his head in his hands. "David," I said softly, standing in the doorway. He did not look up. "I wanted to believe her," he whispered. "I wanted so badly to think she loved me. And now I see it was all built on lies. I betrayed you, Mom. How can you ever forgive me?" His words cut deep, but they did not mend the wound. I shook my head slowly. "Forgiveness is not something you can demand, David. It has to be earned, and some mistakes cannot be undone." He broke then, silent tears streaking his face. But I felt no satisfaction, only sorrow for the boy I once held, the boy who had vanished into the man before me. Emily, however, refused to accept defeat. She began making phone calls, her voice hushed but urgent. I overheard her speaking to someone about lawyers, about challenging the will, about finding loopholes. She still clung to the dream of fortune, even as the walls closed in. One evening, I confronted her in the hallway. "It is over, Emily," I said quietly. "The evidence is clear. The will is final. You cannot change it." Her eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a snarl. "You may think you have won, old woman, but you do not know me. I always find a way." I looked at her with calm. She could not understand. "You have already lost. You just have not accepted it yet." At that, she turned away, muttering under her breath, her pride too wounded to bear the truth. Now the house feels like a fragile stage, each of us trapped in our roles. Emily burns with anger, my son drowns in shame, and I carry the quiet strength of knowing the truth has prevailed. But I cannot ignore the storm still building. Something tells me Emily has one final move, one desperate act before her downfall is complete. Do you think my son's biggest punishment will come from losing the money, or from losing the trust of his own mother forever? Comment below with your thoughts, because I wonder which one will haunt him more in the years ahead. The days following the lawyer's revelation were filled with tension so thick it felt like poison in the air. Emily paced through the house like a trapped animal, her pride refusing to let her accept defeat. My son moved like a ghost, silent and hollow, unable to face me or himself. I watched them both carefully, waiting for the moment when her desperation would break through the last of her composure. It came sooner than I expected. One evening, just after sunset, I returned from the garden to find Emily sitting in the living room with a stranger. He was sharply dressed, carrying a briefcase, his expression one of cool calculation. My son sat on the sofa beside her, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously between them. "We are going to challenge the will," Emily declared before I could even set down my gloves. "Mr. Dalton, here is a lawyer who specializes in these things. We will prove that Robert was coerced. We will prove that you manipulated him." Her words echoed through the room like thunder. I stared at her, then at the man she had brought into my home. My heart ached, not from fear but from the audacity of her deceit. My son avoided my eyes, his shame heavy on his shoulders. Mr. Dalton began to speak about legal strategies, about possible loopholes. I let him finish, then placed my folder on the table with deliberate calm. "I have already provided Robert's lawyer with every document," I said. "The bank statements, the photographs, even the forged receipt Emily tried to use against me. They are in the hands of the court. If you proceed, you will expose yourselves further." Emily's eyes widened, her fury breaking through her polished mask. "You think you are clever," she snapped, "but you cannot fight me forever. I will drag your name through the mud. I will ruin you." At that moment, my son finally lifted his head. His voice was low, broken. "Enough, Emily. Stop. I stacks." She whirled on him, her face contorted with rage. "Do not you dare turn on me now. Everything I did for us. You wanted the money as much as I did. You told me your mother was weak, that she would not stand in the way. Do not pretend you were innocent." His face crumpled under the weight of her words. In her fury, she had stripped away the last illusion he had clung to. The truth was laid bare. He had not only believed her lies, he had fed them with his own ambition. I stepped forward, my voice steady though my heart was heavy. "David, she has shown you who she truly island, and she has shown me who you are as well." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with tears. "Mom, please." But I could not give him what he wanted. Forgiveness was not a gift to be handed out like candy. It was earned, and he had squandered every chance. Emily, realizing she was cornered, lashed out with one final act of cruelty. She stood tall, her chin lifted in defiance. "You may have your house, your money, your precious reputation, but you will die alone. Your son will never love you again, and when you are gone, no one will remember you." Her words were meant to wound, but they fell flat. I had endured her venom long enough to know it was only noise. The silence that followed was louder than her threats. Mr. Dalton closed his briefcase quietly and excused himself, clearly unwilling to entangle himself in her doomed fight. The slam of the door behind him felt like the final note of a closing chapter. Emily turned back to my son, her eyes wild. "Do something," she demanded. "Fix this. You cannot let her win." But he only shook his head, his voice hollow. "It is over, Emily. We lost." She stared at him in disbelief, as though he had betrayed her. Then she laughed, a bitter sound that chilled me to the bone. "No, David, you lost. I never wanted you. I only wanted what you could give me, and now you are nothing." "Are." The words struck him harder than any blow. He sank into the sofa, his face buried in his hands, while Emily stormed upstairs to pack her things. I stood in the doorway, watching the pieces fall into place. Her greed had consumed her, her lies had unraveled, and now she would leave with nothing but bitterness. My son, left behind, would carry the weight of both her betrayal and his own. By midnight, she was gone. The slam of the front door echoed through the empty house, a final punctuation to months of deceit. My son remained in the living room, broken and silent, staring at the shadows on the wall. I did not comfort him. I could not. Some wounds cannot be soothed. Some betrayals cannot be undone. He would live with the knowledge that he had chosen lies over love, greed over family, and the cost of that choice was everything. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. Not yet. The storm had passed, but the wreckage remained, and it would take time before I could walk among the ruins and find my way back to myself. The house was still the morning after Emily left. Her perfume lingered faintly in the air, a ghost of her presence, but the sharp click of her heels was gone forever. I walked slowly through the rooms, touching the backs of chairs, the edges of picture frames, the little corners that had once felt invaded by her eyes. For the first time in months, the silence felt like mine again. My son was still in the living room. He had not moved since the night before, his face hollow, his body slumped. He looked like a boy again, lost and frightened, but I could not allow myself to forget that he was the man who had stood against me. "Mom," he whispered when he saw me. His voice cracked, his eyes red. "I am so sorry. I was blind. I let her poison me. Please do not turn your back on me. Please let me make this right." I listened, my heart heavy but steady. There was a time when I would have rushed to him, wrapped him in my arms, and whispered that everything would be okay. But those days were gone. Love is not meant to be unconditional when it is shattered by betrayal. "You made your choice," I said softly. "You stood beside her when she accused me of stealing. You believed her over me, even when my hands were open and hers were full of lies. Some wounds do not heal, David. Some choices cannot be undone." He broke then, his sobs raw and unguarded. He begged for forgiveness, his voice echoing through the walls that had once been filled with his laughter as a child. But I did not yield. I had survived too much to allow myself to be chained to his guilt. Over the next days, I made my decision. I contacted Mr. Harris again, ensuring that all of Robert's protections remained in place. I changed account access, updated documents, and locked every door Emily had once tried to pry open. I told my son that he would need to leave the house. The trust was his to collect in small pieces if he wished, but my home was no longer his. He looked at me as though I had struck him. "You would put me out? Your own son?" Tears burned my eyes, but my voice was unshakable. "You put me out first, David. Do you remember? You told me to confess to crimes I did not commit. You raised your voice against me in my own kitchen. You chose her over me. Now you will live with that choice." He left quietly, his footsteps heavy, his shoulders bent. I watched from the window as he walked down the driveway, carrying nothing but the weight of his mistakes. For the first time in my life, I did not rush after him. I let him go. The days that followed were strangely calm. I tended my garden again, planting flowers in soil that had been neglected while I fought for my dignity. I opened windows, letting in sunlight and fresh air. I sat in the evenings with a book in my lap and the radio playing softly, the house once more filled with peace instead of poison. I thought often of Robert. I imagined him smiling at the strength he had left behind for me, the foresight that had protected me when I could not protect myself. His love had built the walls that kept me safe, even in his absence. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I thought of my son. I wondered if he lay awake, haunted by the sound of his own voice when he accused me. I wondered if he saw Emily's face in his dreams, a reminder of all he had lost. But I did not reach out. The bond had been severed, and no amount of longing could mend it. One afternoon, as I watered the roses, a neighbor stopped by. She smiled, complimenting the blooms, chatting about small things. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, like a woman with a future instead of a prisoner of her own family. That evening, I lit a single candle in the kitchen. The flame flickered gently, casting a warm glow across the walls. I whispered a quiet thank you to Robert, to myself, to the strength I had discovered through betrayal. I was free. Do you think I was too harsh by cutting them off completely? Or did they deserve every bit of it? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I want to know which side you are on.